The following presentation is a production of Ride the Wave Media.
And the fact that disposable diapers are 70% of the Earth's landfill. That's wild to me. But it also makes me think about like death and the way that we, when people die, we pump them full of formaldehyde to keep them preserved. And then we put them in metal boxes and then put them in concrete boxes in the ground. It's like there's something about our culture that is obsessed with staying around and not integrating back into the earth.
Yeah, especially for religious people who think there's a whole nother world on the other side. Like my pastor grandparents had like open caskets and like the whole thing. And yeah, but they were
You would.
very, like from the time I was a child, they were like, um, we're going to die. These are our plots. We're already watering flowers there. You're welcome to come water the flowers. This is the bench we want here. Come visit us all the time. They were obsessed with their death. And they're like, it's going to be amazing because on the other side is Jesus. And they were just so like sweet and humble about it. And they were just like never living here fully. They were always just like living on the other side. And like they're the only one that I think are not like totally like they were just so genuine about it that I was like, that's very sweet. You're not afraid of anything.
That's kind of adorable, actually. I kind of love that for them.
Yeah.
Hey, everyone.
As a kid to like go water the flowers on their plot, but
Oh, that would be a little morbid.
I no.
Although I think my kids would dig that. My kids have a morbid personality. And I think that if I was like, look, you guys, this is where I'm going to be buried, water my flowers, they would be like, yeah. And also we're going to plant thorns and dandelions.
Well, yeah, I don't know. It was like my first introduction to death, and my grandparents were like, because you don't think your parents are ever going to die, but you know your grandparents are going to die because they're old. And my dad's the youngest of one of seven. So my grandparents were very old when I was born.
They were ancient.
They were like 70 when I was born, and they died at like 96.
Whoa. Oh, you have old grandparents. I had old grandparents too. My grandparents died in like their 90s.
I had some that died in their 60s, and then those ones who died in their 90s, like nothing would fucking kill them. You know what killed them? My grandpa had stage 4 cancer for like 10 years. He had insurance. He had arthritis. He had horrible diabetes. And you know what fucking killed him?
COVID, damn it. Something had to get him. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to Vibing the Apocalypse. I'm your host, the one and only true prophet, the Fresh King Benjamin. It is hang on, I got to figure this out. I think it is I'm keeping an apocalypse countdown. How many days has it been? It's on my Google thing right now. Today is 1,505 of the apocalypse. Yeah, 1,505 since March 15th when they all sent us home for COVID. That's where I'm tracking the apocalypse from. And right on cue, we have mass protests in the streets, universities getting shut down, jackbooted thugs going to arrest 18-year-olds, which is great. Like, definitely those are the people we should be arresting right now. And just in time to talk about all of that apocalyptic stuff, or none of it, we'll see where this conversation goes, is my very good friend, Amber. And before we get to that, I just want to do a couple quick announcements. I have next Friday and Saturday, May 3rd and 4th, y'all. I'm going to be back at Wise Guys, downtown Wise Guys in Salt Lake City, 2 nights headlining. So get tickets, come out, enjoy some laughter while the world burns. And with that, I want to introduce you to my friend Amber. Amber, actually, I met Amber maybe a year or maybe 2 ago. You invited me to be on your podcast, Sex Without Fear. And I was like, sex horrifies me. So I definitely need to come on this podcast. And that was right at kind of the beginning of my sexual healing journey. And we had a really awesome conversation. We've stayed in touch since then. And I'm just thrilled that you are coming on my podcast because you're a very successful podcaster. You have that podcast, and then you just launched another podcast that is crushing it. So, Amber, you want to introduce yourself a little bit? Tell us a little bit about you.
Well, first off, I'm so glad that you called me your friend because I was going to be like, oh, my friend Ben. And then I was like, what if he doesn't consider me his friend? And then I was like, you know what? I think this is your invitation. for me to be part of your post-apocalyptic crew.
100%. That's why I have you on here. I'm actively gathering as many friends as I possibly can,
Ah,
because the only way that we survive is with friends. Because the government's not coming to save us. Jesus isn't coming to save us. The only thing and we can't save ourselves. The only thing that's going to save us is our friendships.
I have wondered, we'll get into this. I have wondered if less is more in that situation, because the more people you add, like in poly situations, like the more you grow your polycule, the more drama there is. Um,
Yeah.
which I'm,
Well, what are you? What's your sign? Tell me who you are, because it may just be that we might just be different there.
you don't know my sign.
Are you a Scorpio?
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So I'm a Gemini.
No,
I want everyone that would be my friend.
not only am I a Scorpio, but I'm also a Scorpio rising. I've got Scorpio. I'm the first day of Scorpio, so
Whoa.
I'm really an asshole about my sign. I'm like, I'm superior.
I grant you that. I can't sting anyone. I've got nothing. All I can do is bounce around and be funny and talk to people. That's my entire skill set.
My oldest is a Gemini. But okay, so speaking of Scorpio, I'll finish my introduction because, of course, the Scorpio has the sex podcast.
Of course.
So I am a jack of all trades. Um, so I'm a birth doula. I'm a doula. I'm a birth worker. I've begun dabbling in the idea of doing death doula stuff. And
Ooh.
and I have, you know, all these children now that just run around my house that are mine. Just 3, but it's a lot. And I do a lot of sex positive education that is geared toward trauma informed care. And then, yeah, I have my old podcast that you came on, which I'm so glad that we connected over. And my newest podcast, which everyone should check out, is called Everything's Canceled. We do deep dives on celebrity cancellations, and we do a lot of, because I am who I am, we do a lot of Me Too topics and all of that. And yeah, it's crushing it. What the hell is happening to my podcast? It's crazy.
I think that people are tired of being told what to do and what to think and what to believe and what to say. And so I think that anyone that can come out and just be like, let's talk about it. I think that authentic conversation is in really high demand, because we're just so sick of people telling us what is okay and what's not okay.
Well, I'm going to tell you something like kind of morbid and awful that's true.
Yes.
P. Diddy might be the worst thing that happened to rap culture, but he is the best thing to happen to my podcast.
Oh my God. I'm only vaguely aware of the P. Diddy thing. I only am vaguely aware of who P. Diddy is. I don't think I could tell you. I don't think that before you said that he was a rapper, I could have told you that he was a rapper. I would have said that he did music. I don't think I could name you a single P. Diddy song.
You probably only know one, and it's the one that samples, like, it's I'll Be Missing You, that he did about Tupac or Biggie when he died.
How does it go?
From the 90s. I can't sing it right now. It's like, but it samples the Police song. Anyways, go listen to it when we're done. You'll know it. But
Okay.
P. Diddy is the new Epstein right now. It's huge sex trafficking ring. And the thing is, we kind of hit that episode first before it hit the news. And so now we were getting like 30,000 listens a week on this episode. It was insane.
Whoa.
Blew us up because you don't have to know anything about the celebrities we covered. That's the whole point, is to go from beginning to end, to introduce this person and tell you why they were.
Oh my God. I need your podcast.
Yeah, it's that.
I desperately need your podcast.
That was the thing. The format was just something that really took off. But anyways, of course, we talk a lot about sex and trauma and our opinions on that, but it's very like factual. We go through the court case documents, do everything. It's great.
Awesome. Oh my God. I'm gonna check. I haven't listened to it yet, so I'm gonna check it out after, because the thing that is the most kind of obnoxious about having grown up the way that I did is that I feel like I'm constantly having to Google what's going on.
Well, yeah, you might
So
I know the P. Diddy song for real.
For real may not know the P. Diddy song. Like you're like, yeah, back in the 90s. I'm like, in the 90s, I was listening to Motab and Bach, like that almost exclusively with a little bit of the Phantom of the Opera because I was able to sneak a tape on the compound. So
when I came on to your social media the first time was when you put up the video where you were looking for music recommendations and someone said Nirvana and I was like, yes, you should do that.
yeah. Yeah. So I listened to Nirvana for the first, that was maybe a year and a half ago, but I listened to Nirvana and Smells Like Teen Spirit. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And then I'm doing it on live on TikTok, right? I'm on TikTok live. I'm listening to this stuff. I'm just loving it. And I'm like, oh my God, you guys, I have to go see these. Are they still touring? Are they still in concert? Can I go see them?
Oh, you don't know?
Yes. Yes. And then everyone's like in the chat, they're like, should we tell him? Oh my God, he doesn't know. Oh my God. And so I learned about Kurt Cobain as an artist, that he existed as an artist. And then one song later, I learned that he'd killed himself.
Yeah.
And I was like, it was a whole roller coaster.
But I have to say the fact that it like touched you as like a grown adult who was sober on TikTok. I'm like, I don't know if Nirvana will hit you the same if you're not like an angry teenager locked in their room stoned.
Well, the good news is that I still am an angry teenager. So I'm still in the angry teenager phase of my life because like, if you don't experience, like if you don't, everyone has to live an entire life, right? So if you don't have an adolescent phase because you were like working in a factory like I was, then you just get to do that in your 30s, which is what I'm doing now. So I would say that in some ways I'm like 16. I think I might be 17 now, but yeah, but at the time I was like 14. I don't think I was stoned, but I was an angry teenager and it just like, oh, it was so good.
Well, good. I'm probably perpetually an angry teenager in some ways.
I think kind of moving, maybe segueing, look at this segue, you guys, segueing into a apocalypse discussion. I think that we need some angry teenage energy in America right now because we got to burn some stuff down. So I want to actually begin our conversation by asking you what kind, and we can go however deep into this you want. When you were young and when you were kind of coming of age, what kind of beliefs did you have around the apocalypse? Was that something that you talked about? Was that something that you were kind of thinking about? Was that in your awareness? What was that sort of like for you?
Okay, so like I said, I was raised by my grandparents who were pastors. I later married a pastor. We talked a lot about that in our podcast on my. So it's interesting because I was the perfect victim for religion. That shit terrified me. Are you kidding me? The
Yeah.
hell is something that like I'm still deconstructing and have to tell myself every day, I'm gonna be okay. I'm sorry, there's light going in my camera in my glass. I'm just like trying to like manipulate light here so that I'm not looking like this. But it is
You look great. You're fine.
so I had huge fears of it to where I actually kind of avoided the details of it. And
Mm.
kind of grew up in churches that were a little bit like honey attracts flies a little better. And so they would avoid harsh topics. They were like it was they
They were kind of sweet about it.
going to go to hell if you sin, you need to be saved. But they weren't really talking about, revelations a lot. However, I also grew up in the generation of the Left Behind books that traumatized
Yes.
me, and I had to read them. And every time I would like take a nap at my house and wake up and my parents were outside in the yard, I had the full, like, I still sometimes have this panic if I like wake up alone unexpectedly or something that I was left behind.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I read those books too. Do you want me to maybe, I don't know if this will help you or not, but do you want me to maybe offer you a little code that might help alleviate some of the fear of being left behind?
Yes.
Okay. I just want you to imagine a world in which all of the fundamentalist Christians have been taken away.
Yeah.
If you get left behind, think about how awesome that world will be.
I think the biggest fears for me came from being separated from family that I love. And a huge
Yeah.
difference for me with that was my parents were divorced, and that from the time I was 1 years old. And it's like, well, you must have one good parent and one bad parent because they were always rivaling.
Mm.
And I was constantly torn between, well, obviously my mom's the good one because she has the victim complex. And my dad isn't saved right now, so he must be the bad one. And I need to save him. I have nightmares about the end of the world and like not having enough time to save my dad. And like, you know, I, it was so much pressure. And I probably went through that till I was
Yeah.
like 26 years old.
Wow. Okay. So for the whole kind of formative years of your life, there was this really deep fear of hell, number one, and then also this fear of the end of the world for sort of two reasons. One, maybe you might not be worthy, maybe you might get left behind.
Right.
And then number two would be, even if you are, what about the people that I love who aren't?
Right. Huge, big pressure. And then also like segueing into a lot of like who I am and what I do in all of my projects is that I was sexually abused as a child and religion was used against me. Like, well, God knows that
Mm.
you involved yourself, that you didn't say no or whatever.
Yeah.
I was impure from the time I was 4 and I hadn't asked for forgiveness or and it was still going on. These are like huge layers to like, my issues with religion and how deeply it affected me my whole life, and it still definitely does. And it also, on the flip side, during deconstruction, played a huge role in my kinks. And we can get into that a little bit, but I have like a huge Satan kink, and like
Oh my God, I love this.
I do that of like fucking Satan and being his like big hottest bitch. And
Oh, so hot. I'm sorry that happened. That is not cool, and it breaks my heart. And it's because the kink thing is funny to me because I also have I've also found that my trauma has informed my kinks.
100%.
Like I tell people like, look, tell me what your kink is, and I'll tell you how you were abused.
Yeah,
And
very common.
with which is pretty common, and I honestly kind of think that that is one of the most beautiful and amazing things about human sexuality, that we're able to sort of take these really traumatic experiences, and then our sexuality is like, "Watch me make this turn me on.
I think
Watch me."
the older I get, the more I realize it's kind of a coping mechanism.
Mhm.
Healthy or unhealthy, it's hard to define and tell people. I have, a lot of developing thoughts and ideas, especially I'm doing an episode soon on trauma and BDSM. I don't know if my listeners are
Interesting.
takes. Yeah. And, my journey through all of those things of, yeah, how we handle our trauma and kinks. And
I would think that if it's sort of, I don't know that it's an on or off, like a yes or no. I would think that it's, the question for me would be the level of consciousness that you're bringing to it. So are you aware that that is what you're doing? Are you sort of deliberately stepping into that space and intentionally exploring that? Or are you kind of driven to unhealthy behaviors or unhealthy situations because you're sort of unconsciously acting out old patterns and old woundings?
I think the biggest question is actually, is that environment safe for you to step into? Not necessarily how you go into that space. I think people with trauma are preyed upon to be brought into that community.
Oh, yeah.
And
Mhm.
such an easy target. And any man that wants to beat the shit out of women has a really great opportunity to take that fresh 18, 19-year-old who wants to explore their trauma and BDSM and completely, there's a lot of abuse in that community.
Yeah, no, totally. That's such a good point. Yeah. Because there is like, as I've sort of stepped into that space and really done it with intention and tried to find safe communities and safe people to do it with. One of the things that I've really appreciated about exploring kink and exploring BDSM is the opportunities that it's given me to practice using my voice to frame my sexual encounters, right? To actually speak up for what I want and to advocate for what I want. And what I've found is that it's hard. As someone who suffered with trauma, it's actually pretty difficult for me sometimes to say the thing that I want, or to say the thing that I don't want, or to speak. And yeah, oh man, it's such a tricky space.
Yeah, and while there's, experienced people who have gone through therapy and are in their 30s in the community, a huge part of the community is young girls from like 18 to 25 who are not that age mentally or in their trauma and are still very much back there. And they will believe anything they are told, which is a huge thing is, well, if you want to heal your rape trauma, you should try BDSM. Why is that the first thing that we're telling them? That is not the first place that you should go to heal your sexual trauma, and that they are only cool if they're doing these things. And
Yeah.
they are not getting actual real treatment for their trauma, and they're only using this. They're just perpetuating the same trauma onto.
Yeah, they're continually wounding themselves. So you heard it here, y'all. Before you do anything, you should definitely go to therapy. That's step one.
Yeah. And people talk about like, oh, just go to therapy, or like the only two tangible things we tell people with sexual trauma is to go to therapy, which is very vague, and to go try BDSM. And there's an actual real thing that we can offer people that is included in therapy, and that is EMDR therapy. That is number one
Yeah.
recommended for sexual trauma. So if you are hearing this, go no further, start there.
EDMR, yeah, and that's where when I started therapy, I started getting into two things. I had a therapist, and she did EMDR with me, and she did psychosomatic work, where basically she would literally just sit across from me and mirror me. She would just like mirror what my body was doing. And at first, I thought that was the dumbest shit. And I was like, I cannot believe I am paying you $250 an hour
Expensive.
for you to sit there and move your body the way that I'm doing it, and to ask me how my body feels. I don't know how my body feels. I don't feel anything in my body. And then slowly, like, it did sort of kind of start to unpack, but it's a whole process. It's a whole journey. And yeah, oh man, I would not tell anyone to just jump straight into extreme sexual activities as a way to heal trauma, because oh my God, that would be so awful.
Well, I'm someone that went through that, and that was the community that welcomed me. That was something that and I did not want to be told I wasn't wise enough or old enough to make those decisions. That community made me feel more mature, more cool, and that this must be the way, and I think a lot of girls and people, but a lot of young girls fall into that trap post. They're
Yeah.
out of their parents' house. You're not going to tell me what to do. And they regain power from that. I did regain power from that of like, oh, I'm going to pick who I have sex with. I'm going to tell them to do these things to me instead of it happen. It's a lot. There's so many layers. Again, I'm going to have a new podcast episode on this pretty soon.
Yeah, I'm excited. For you to dig more into that, because I think that you bring a really important balance to the conversation, which is kind of like part of what I want to do in this podcast, right? Is to have conversations about the way that we used to do things and the way that we should do things now that everything broke, right? So the apocalypse to me is like this big opportunity of the world broke, it's in pieces. Now we get to rebuild it. And I think that you're uniquely positioned because you've got, because you're a Scorpio. Number one, you're like, look, I like sex. I like weirdness. Like, yeah, let's go. But then you also have this sort of wealth of experience of dealing with your own trauma, dealing with your own experience in that community, and then finding paths that are healthy and safe. And so you're able to sort of it's not like it's not like a Puritan approach, and it's also not like a hedonistic approach. It's sort of an integrated approach.
Well, one interesting thing that I was going to bring up a bit ago, we talked about, COVID 2020, and we are talking about riots. I actually deconstructed from my religion during COVID. And
Oh, really? Okay. Tell me about that.
that fresh. Honestly, it's not that great of a story, but it does remind me of the day that I got saved. And
Okay.
it feels just as equally like mind blowing for me because I've been on a journey of trying to fit religion into my life or fit myself into religion, and that been very open about that internal conflict my whole life. I would go to church and be like, this isn't what works for me. Explain it so that it can make sense to me so I can be in this religion full-heartedly.
Hmm.
Because I needed it to make sense. I could not give myself over to God. I remember the day that I did. I remember when I thought in my 16-year-old head that it all clicked. I was saved. It was very overwhelming. It felt like I felt the magic, you know?
Yeah.
And then I remember like continuing on the journey of just like, I know that this isn't right, but no one can answer my questions because when I talk to people, they've been atheists their whole life. They never went to church. They can't answer my hard questions, and I need someone to meet me where I'm at because part of deconstructing, depending on how deep you are, someone's got to meet you that deep to pull you back out, right? And
Right.
I remember one of the first people that got a hold of me, they recommended the Atheist Experience podcast. They bring on believers onto the podcast to try to prove evidence for God. And they have a whole panel of atheists, some who used to be pastors, some who've studied all the Bibles, and they would answer those questions and meet those people where they're at to disprove what they, and that helped me a lot. And then,
Oh, interesting.
yeah, and then someone gave me the book, The God Delusion, which is very popular. And I'm reading
Yeah, Dawkins.
a lot of it blowing my mind. And then I remember the one thing that just undid it all for me. And it was a line that said, all Christians are one God away from being atheist. Like,
Mm.
oh, so if I apply my logic on why these other gods aren't real to the one that I believe in, that one doesn't hold up either. And that was finally the thing that broke. And I remember it, I mean, it still feels like I'm a new Christian in the way that I want to shout from the rooftops that you don't have to question this. Like, it feels new and amazing to me. And I'm what, 4 years into it, right?
Sure. And that happened during COVID. So during COVID, you read that from Dawkins and you're like, oh,
Yeah. I
oh,
never even finished the book. That was what I needed.
wow.
Yeah, and so my 2020 was a little interesting. My partner got ran over by a car and broke like every bone in his body. He's a
Gee.
Yeah, he was a cyclist, and so I was hunkered down taking care of him. He also has asthma really bad. We were really trying not to get COVID and kind of used it as an excuse to just stay home in our love bubble. So we did a lot of that. And we stayed home watching riot porn of everything going on with George Floyd, and we were doing protests, and I moved in with him, and ever since we've now had a baby and we've done, and I started my podcast around that time. And so I've been kind of on the other side, which I've been waiting for. I've been waiting for to be this person, and I knew it was there.
Yeah.
Like you have to take the journey. You have to learn the things. And so yeah, so now
I love
I'm on the other side.
I love that description of your journey because I feel like what you just described, I think is because when I talk about the apocalypse, that doesn't feel hopeless to me. It doesn't feel I'm not scared. I'm actually really hopeful because to me, an apocalypse is like a forest fire or like a really hard winter where it's cyclical, right? Like we've been going in these cycles as humans, and sometimes we go a little bit too far into something and the world has to break, the world has to burn. But the reason that it breaks and burns is so that we can rebuild it new and fresh, right? And I love that that's essential. Like there was this national apocalypse that's happening, and then you're having this kind of personal like faith apocalypse, and you're also having this like interpersonal apocalypse with your partner, and all of that is sort of like, I mean, I'm sure it was not fun or easy. I'm sure there were parts of it that were really scary and difficult, but it also sort of gave you the raw material to remake yourself into kind of who you always were, but another level of that.
Yeah, it was also the time when I went into eating disorder treatment and cut out my family who were linked to my sexual abuse. There's so much in it. Like, yes, hard for sure. There was definitely, I also lost all of my grandparents who raised me within 3 months. They all died. So
Mm.
it was my first experience with grief and death, and it just happened back to back to back. And I never had someone close to me die other than my best friend in elementary school. So this was,
Mm.
I mean, just the deepest heartbreak. And I didn't realize how beautiful death was. And now I'm in love with death because the loss that you feel in death is only a reflection of how beautiful you were loved and how much you had. And it's just like an
Yeah.
opportunity for every memory that you have with someone to just be washing over you. And, now I'm a mother and I already was able to like continue the cycle and be able to like let go of the past. It's about me and my kids now. And just thinking, I mean, death is amazing. I love it. And
I want to dig into that because as soon as you said that, I laughed and then I felt bad for laughing but the reason that I laughed is the thought that popped in my head as soon as you said, death is so beautiful. I was like, you're such a fucking Scorpio.
well, I didn't know. I've avoided the topic of death. Like, I would not help my friends who are grieving. I was like, I don't know anything about this. This feels really icky. I've got religious things tied up. I don't know how I
Yeah.
feel. And then I experienced it and I was like, wow, wow.
I want to really dig into that because I think that like if I sort of peer into the future and if I sort of look at because I don't think we're there yet, right? We're still I think we're still in the middle of all of this craziness. And I think that, you know, we're already seeing this, right? Like something like 50,000 people have died in Gaza, right, over the last 6 months. And that's just a fraction of what's happening everywhere, right? So we are as a species and as a collective, we have been dealing with a lot of death. I don't even think that we've fully processed COVID, the deaths, the fact that, I mean, I don't know even know the numbers. The last time I looked, it was 1 million Americans, and that was like 2 years ago. And so like so much death, so many people have died and so many more people are going to die. And I think that as a collective, we are going to have to get really good at we have to get better at responding to death. And so I'm actually really thrilled that you seem to have arrived as like a prophetess of death to help us into this next new time. What is it about that? Like take us on that journey.
Well, it's so interesting because when I was writing notes for this podcast, I'm going to tell you right now, I have no idea what it is. Okay. I have a page of notes and like, I hope it kind of makes sense. And I hope, like, I was hoping that you would help guide this conversation a bit. But I used to say your age, like your wisdom, your wise age, really wasn't significant until you became a parent, right? Because everything makes sense once you have a baby. And I mean, it's
Mhm.
not to invalidate people who don't have children, but it's fucking true. Your body goes through so much. You have to face so much. It's an opportunity to be challenged the most in your life. And so I would kind of gauge people's maturity based on how long they've been a parent and what, you know what I mean? And then I experienced
Yeah.
death, and birth and death are so similar. The way you have to hold space and the way that you just don't really know how it's going to go, and all the thoughts and fears
Hmm.
and love that you have to face in both situations. And so now I'm like, okay, well, there is, you know, when you bring life into the world, that's a sign of maturity and wisdom. Also, when you experience your first bout of real grief, when you lose someone that's a huge loss in your life and you have to
Yeah.
process that. And so then it's like, okay, well, now we're talking about the apocalypse. You brought me into this apocalypse crew to engage with sexuality or these topics, which sexuality is such a broad, And I was like, wow, well, birth and death fit perfect into that. But there's this whole middle ground, like what's between birth and death, and that's sexuality, our ego, who we are, our life journey. And so, like, what do I bring into this apocalypse is like really interesting because maybe I could deliver your baby, or maybe I could like join your polycule, or maybe, like there's such a wide span. But I'll kind of go through a little bit of my list of um, my thoughts, and some of them contradict each other too, because, well, what is it like? We're kind of post apocalypse right now, and it doesn't really look like the end of the world necessarily. Like, I don't feel alone. There's still electricity. Like, it doesn't look exactly the way I thought. So I have some.
This is the most posh version of the apocalypse that we could possibly ask for. We have Netflix, we have electricity. It's pretty great.
So I was kind of thinking, well, like, what does my role look like right now in real life post this apocalypse? And I have a lot to say on that. And then I thought, well, if it looks like the way the Bible says it does, what's my role there? And some of it contradicts each other. So I'm just going to kind of go through some of it because they're just thoughts to ponder. I guess we don't really know, right?
We don't. And that's part of it, right? Is that what the most I think enduring and true feature of an apocalypse is the uncertainty.
Right.
We don't know, and we have no way of knowing, and there's no way that we could predict.
Right. I do have some predictions though, so we'll see what you think. The biggest one off the
I'm
bat, I
excited.
think, is like the end of the world, or when we go through these big shifts. The biggest thing I think that we saw tangible was the we were already on this shift, but it was sort of an opportunity to go all the way, which is people becoming poly or exploring non-monogamy and kind of deconstructing toxic monogamy. And also
Mhm.
for sexuality, sort of like you have this whole spectrum of genders and spectrum of sexuality, sexual orientation. And I'm not here to invalidate anyone's straightness, but I tend to devalue people's straightness.
Right.
And
We're all a little queer.
yes, I don't even want to invalidate someone's like lesbian or gayness, but I really do think when we challenge it, we are all on a spectrum of like what we're attracted to. And I think a lot more types of people fall into those categories. And I think people are becoming more neutral in the middle, poly or non monogamous in some sort of variety, pansexual or bisexual, and pretty androgynous in the middle of like gender performance.
Yeah, I mean, I just as an example for me, right? Like over the last couple of years, I was like, fuck this shit. I like having long hair. And you know what I'm gonna do with my long hair? I don't have them here, but I have pigtails now. Like that's my favorite way. And I'm like, I like presenting masculine. I like that energy. I like being I don't necessarily want to like be a woman, but I do like like I like having my nails painted. I like having my hair long. I'm excited to be able to learn to braid my hair and to actually make my hair really pretty. So that and it's more and what it feels like to me is that we used to have in the old world, we used to have these very rigid roles about who you could be and then how you would perform based on that. And what it feels like is happening now is that people are saying, that's bullshit. That didn't work for me. That made me depressed and angry. It wasn't an authentic expression of who I am. And it's a boring expression, right? To only have two ways, humans are so fucking creative. We are so creative and so brilliant. And to be put into a box where we can only be one of two things is absurd. To be put in a box that we can only be one of 18 things, that we have to always be one thing is absurd because we're just this constant, like chaotic expression. And especially during an apocalyptic time when the world is rapidly changing, I think I think that the energy of like pan or queer, which essentially is just like, I'm going to do whatever I want, is actually incredibly adaptive because it means that I'm paying attention, I'm creative, I'm engaged in this present moment. And that is a really powerful skill to have. I would way rather have a polycule supporting me in the apocalypse of a bunch of queer pansexuals because I know that whatever I need, I'm probably going to be able to get from them because they have a wide variety of interests and skills.
Well, we have been told that straightness and monogamy is practical because it creates life and we can set these rules. That's very practical. I think polycules are very practical. I think you have to remove your emotion a little bit out of it to make it work and see these people as your team. And so that's pretty practical and it challenges more
Yeah.
emotion. But I want to jump back to something that you said because I think when it comes to queerness and being really in tune with yourself to know what you want and then just be that without those boxes. You said, "Well, I don't think I really want to be a woman, but I want my hair long and such." And I think what we're doing is removing what does that even mean to be a woman. And something that
Mhm.
I'm very femme presenting. I consider myself cis gender woman. And I do things that are more on the feminine side of things. But I definitely was the girl growing up. I was the tomboy. That label was put on me. That's a super problematic thing. It definitely wants the not like other girls, complicated, conundrum, if you will. And I definitely would love for you to listen to my Barbie episode on the podcast because I go very deep into what that meant for me and what it meant for me to be a woman. And it wasn't until like, the last year or so that I was like, well, I didn't even know there was a word for this, but agender, I was like, that's me. I've never cared about what those boxes said, and I've just done what I've done. And if it came across femme, if it came across masculine, I have no relationship to it. And I guess in agender fashion, I don't even really talk about my agenderness because it's such a disconnect and like
Non-issue.
I don't care. I really don't. I don't care to like have a strong identity in my gender at all. And that's not to say other people shouldn't. I totally honor that. I love that you're very into your gender identity and love exploring those and talking about it. I just, for myself, have never cared to have those boxes or trying to define what a woman is or isn't. And that's always been very freeing for me. That's where I felt very free. And I think we're going to move into a lot more of that like neutral ground, especially this young generation. They have all the words for it that soon they won't even have to
Oh,
think
yeah.
about these words for it. They're just like, oh, I am who I am. And you don't need to have a word for me. This is where I am in life right now. And this is who I am. And so,
Yeah, there's a comedian that I follow, and he has a great joke. I can't remember his name, but he's talking about the difference between millennials and are you a millennial or are you Gen Z? Where did you
I'm
land?
1992, so I am a millennial.
Okay, hell yeah. So there's us, right? And then there's Gen Z. And he's like, look, millennials, and he's talking about our relationship to boomers and how millennials were like, give us gay marriage. And boomers were like, hell no, no gay marriage for you. And then Gen Z came along and was like, gender is a myth and nothing matters. And the boomers were like, okay, we'll give you gay marriage.
Yeah. And now we're just like, does anyone want to be married to the state? Like
Right. Who wants to be married to?
yeah, all we
Yeah.
make gay people a slave to the state as well. So whatever.
Yeah. Like, what are we doing? Why? And I love too this idea of, cause I think what we're going back to is a more tribal way of being. I think we're finding our tribes again. And polycules feel very tribal to me, where it's like, I'm finding my people. There are people that I care about. There are going to be, sort of mixed and nuanced and varying levels of sexual relationships within that. But it's going to be done. We're going to try to do it in a healthy way. We're going to try to use communication. We're going to navigate feelings. But at the core, what we're really doing is we're creating. I think a lot of people in our situation have we've lost the support of our families because of what we've done, right? Because of the ways that we've deconstructed and moved out of this very rigid, very Puritan, very binary way of thinking. And now we're sort of finding our tribes again. And then we're and I think that's really important because as the population declines, as people have fewer children, as the nuclear family sort of like implodes, humans need other humans to take care of them. We're a tribal community species. We have to be in relationship with other people. And I think that it's going to become a really important skill to be able to build those communities of support for yourself.
Well, this brings me to my point too, where, when I was going into this, like a contradictory thought that I had was like, oh, I think about all these ways that will be brought closer together, right? In polycules or, like what you were talking about. But I was thinking about how like the actual definition of an apocalypse is the end of the world, whatever. And um apocalypses breed division. And so, I'm thinking about like people's sexuality that might become more normal, but the more that something becomes normal in that way, if there is a government involved, they may have stronger retaliation, which we've seen in 2020, like more trans visibility brought more trans controversy and laws, But I was
Yeah, and more trans laws, right? Like right here in Utah, they were like, the world is literally burning down around us and our lake is drying up. And the Utah legislature was like, do you know what the most important thing for us to do right now? Legislate where people pee.
yeah. Yep. Yeah. So when I Googled apocalypse, because that's what I had to do for this podcast, I was like,
Yes.
looking up, and it says that in the Bible, it defines it as the final battle between good and evil. And I was like, well, sexuality has always been the grounds for a battle between what we define as good and evil, especially with our
Hmm.
bodies. So,
Yeah.
whether it's trans bodies or abortions. And so I was like, well, will we have more peace to do what we want? Or is the reality like what we saw in COVID, where maybe there's not going to be access to abortions? Maybe there's not going to be, access to supplies that are needed for like condoms and things like this. And if I can tell you anything, and I don't care what your opinion is, I'm just going to say mine.
Do it.
People's relationship to masks and vaccines, whatever, I get it, but masks and washing their hands and being kind about their germs in the post COVID world is any indication of how people treat condoms, STD testing, and vaccinating themselves for STDs. I know we're going to have an epidemic of unwanted pregnancies, unwanted STDs. And I know that firsthand because as someone that engages in non-monogamy and I ask people when the last time they've been tested, they fucking don't get tested. That is real. So as we
Yeah. And the Venn diagram between people who bitch about wearing a mask and who bitch about wearing a condom is a circle.
It is. Absolutely. And so I think, I think about my role in the apocalypse and sex education. I think if we lose access to abortion, we're going to start doing herbal abortions more. And so trickling down that information and teaching, other women how to give themselves an herbal abortion or how to use herbal birth controls. And then the big
Mm.
thing that we've lost, like as much as I love birth control and think it has given us a lot of freedoms, in it, we've lost the art of knowing about our cycles. And
Yeah.
when I tell people all the time, like, you're on birth control 30 days of the month, you can only get pregnant for about 48 hours of that. So if you know what 48 hours you can get pregnant, actually don't need birth control. Like that.
Yeah. That's kind of beautiful that there's, I mean, and again, huge advocate for birth control. Everyone should have access. You should have that choice, right? And I think there is something really beautiful about, because I think that what you just described about coming back to your body and being aware of your body, I think that's something that's happening actually in a lot of different areas where people are healing, is they're starting to come back to themselves and to become more sovereign of like, oh, I understand how I work and I can navigate myself.
But,
I can sort of be responsible for myself.
but not only have we lost the art of knowing our cycles when we have normal cycles, we definitely have lost the art of teaching women how to know their bodies when they're abnormal. I am putting that in quotes. So it
Yeah.
sounds like, oh, well, I have long cycles. I have this problem. I have that problem. So I can't do natural family planning. Yes, you can. There's answers to this. And so, and I'm not saying across the board, I'm not, like I said, I'm pro birth control. I'm hyper aware of things like PCOS and such. So, but I'm saying we're moving into a world where those things aren't available. So what do? We need to have this information on how to track our cycles. And even if I'm just putting this out here to listeners, even if you're on birth control, if you really do not want a baby, you better figure out like how to also be tracking your cycle on birth control because birth control fails. And so you might want to avoid sex or even use condoms while on your birth control during certain. Anyways.
Or gentlemen, there's a very simple procedure that you can perform that alleviates the need for women in your life to deal with this problem. It takes about 15 minutes, and all you need afterward is a little bowl and a bag of peas for about 48 hours.
Exactly.
Go get yourself snipped.
But will that it be available post apocalypse? I don't know. So
I watched the dude do it to me. I'm pretty sure I could do it to another guy.
you'll be the one giving vasectomies. Got it.
I'll be giving vasectomies for free. Free vasectomies. I just need a couple chads to practice on.
So
I want to.
oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, which moves me into going back to our roots with birth, and I'm not here to say everyone should have a home birth, okay? I'm also pro hospital. I've done it in both settings. But if we lose access to these hospitals, we have to have the skills to deliver babies and know how to birth our babies without fear and without medical intervention, and how to handle that, because a lot of people would feel very lost at the idea of like, oh my gosh, I'm going to give birth and there's no epidurals, there's no hospital, what do we do? And sort of accepting the way that nature rolls. And when you just leave nature alone, first off, 25% of pregnancies will end in miscarriage just naturally. That's just the luck of the draw.
Mm.
And 10% of births would be a needed C-section or end in death for the baby or the mother. That is just nature. It's like when you throw seeds out into your garden, they can all be in the same environment. You can water them all the same, but not all of them are going to grow properly. Some are going to be deformed. Some are going to die right off the bat, and some might need extra help, right? And so when we think about those stats, it's like, well, like, you're also gonna have to accept these outcomes and the other side of the world. And as tragic and morbid as that is, I love to save mothers and babies. There's also something beautiful about respecting nature in this way, and that, it's huge.
Natural selection is there for a reason, right? Like there's a, and I think too, like kind of coming back to this acceptance of death, like if we accept death as a functional part of nature, that things are supposed to die. I think that when I look at, especially when I look at like in my world, right, in the LDS world, in the Mormon world is almost completely dominated by old white dudes in their 90s. And I look at them and I think, not like I hope you die, but I just look at them and I think, die, move on. Like let something new come up, right? And I think there's so much old and frail and brittle in our world. And because we're so afraid, we think of death as such a bad thing because I'm so important. This vessel, I'm so important. I can never die. And a world in which nothing ever died is a horrifying world.
Well, and I think just knowing your place as you age, right? So part of the cycle of life is that you go back to being a baby, and you have to go there. And we have this idea that the older you get, the wiser you are, and you're at a hierarchy. Respecting our elders has turned into letting them run our country, letting them continue to drive even when they run over people. And that's not what it is. You have to accept that you've gone back into a place where people have to take care of you. We have to accept as young people that it's a rite of passage to take care of our old, not respect them,
Yep.
but wipe their ass. That is something you cannot avoid. You cannot just send your family to fucking facilities where they're abused. The reality is that just like it's a rite of passage to have your own child or to live in your own childhood, it is a rite of passage to take care of your parents and your grandparents or whoever. I challenge everybody to take care of somebody in the end of their life. Caretaking is needed, and you learn so much, and it humbles you as a person, and they deserve that care. And so it's like, well, maybe Biden and Trump right now, who I believe both are in adult diapers from everything I can see, should
100%.
sitting with their grandkids, and their big outing of the day is to get their mail and water their roses. And like, that is beautiful. Enjoy that phase of your life. You do not have to be the most powerful man in the country.
Yeah, I think about that sometimes when I see Biden and I see him just struggling to walk in a straight line to his podium. I do think that there's something kind of, I don't know, mythically or sort of archetypally fitting about America, that the two people that we have to pick from are both like really old, crazy men in different ways, right? It's two versions of, and I think that sort of speaks to the ancientness, like this experiment, this country, the way that we were currently configured has sort of come to the end of its life, and it's time for it to die. That the fact that, because we have so many brilliant people live on Turtle Island, and the fact that our two choices are Biden, who, when he's asked to describe America, is like, it can be described in one word, right? There's that, which is my favorite thing that a president. Have you seen that?
No, but you really sounded like you were speaking in tongues, and I really loved it.
Oh my God. He's asked, he's like, American is a country that can be described in one word. And that is so good because it's exactly true. That is exactly how to describe America. And so we've got that. And then we've got, Trump raging about like, they're trying to throw me in jail and the immigrant, like the classic, like old man, get off my lawn. Like, what are these young people doing? And, and I think I love what you said too about how, because I feel anger towards Trump and I feel maybe some compassion towards Biden, but I like what you said about how these are old men who should be surrounded by family, very gently and lovingly being cared for, listening to their stories, right? There's a way that we could be approaching them. And instead, we're pitting them in this contest that is dividing, that's just designed to divide America in a really ugly way.
Yeah, and you're right. I think we have done that to them. I think we especially put Biden in a position to be our hero out of Trump, right? And he feels like he can do this, and I really think he wants to be home watching TV.
Oh my God, he wants to just be watching the Golden Girls, like, or I don't know what he wants, but yeah, he just wants to be like surrounded by his family.
Yeah.
Poor guy.
Okay,
Mm.
I have a whole nother I'm gonna take us on another journey real quick.
Okay, let's go.
Okay, so the other thoughts that I had about sex and the apocalypse is that, we were talking about how people will come together, but also there might be a lot of isolation, especially like we saw in COVID, 6 feet apart. And what did we see happen? A huge increase in sex work and especially online sex work. People were
Hmm.
lonely, people had to be alone, and there's a lot of controversy over that. And I kind of wonder if some of our, restrictions on sex work will either go away, but sex work has existed since the beginning of time. And, women were burned at the stake for it. Will that happen all over again? I
Yeah.
lot
Not only has sex work existed since the beginning of time, but in some cultures, this came up in my conversation my last episode
I want
I had on, yeah, Molly the stripper. I just hosted her grand opening for her cabaret last night. She's awesome. Like she's such a cool human. And but what it reminded, like that conversation, then that, like, not only has sex work existed since the dawn of time, in some cultures, it was not seen as bad. In some cultures, it was honored, right? In some cultures, you would go to the temple and and it was a sacred act. And so I would like to go back to that, please.
well, this goes into like my contradictory thoughts that may or may not happen. That's hard to predict. It's like, will people be more picky about the sex they have, or will there be more desperation? Will people be more picky about the partners that they have because they maybe you really want to be picky about who you bring into your and if think about the people who had COVID relationships and they're just immediately bunkered down. They should have been a little bit more picky about who they were going to be indefinitely stuck in a house with.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lesson that we've learned that maybe loneliness was better than being stuck with someone, right? And then I also think about how vulnerable we could be being trapped in this situation. Domestic violence was on the rise. Will we become sex slaves all over again? Will relationships become more transactional in that way? And because as a woman, I'm weaker, will this put me right back into the days of like sex slavery? And,
Yeah.
you know,
And that's legitimate, right? When I hear like the red pill community or like like there's a whole community of humans who want that to happen.
I'm hoping
And they're all
they
men.
heaven. I hope they all go to heaven.
Exactly. Yeah. They get raptured immediately. The incels, I mean, look, incels, they're celibate anyway.
Right. God's an
Take them. Take them, Jesus. Jesus is an incel.
And I don't know if that means that he wants to bring all the other ones who are competition for him up there.
I think Jesus is either an incel or he's super kinky. Because he did take on the punishment of all of us. He was like, give me all of the punishment, daddy.
I think, okay, even on this side of my deconstruction, I still want to believe that like Jesus is good. Um,
Oh, totally. Yeah.
like I want to believe that he like loved
Oh, shit.
and that. Oh, are you there? We were shut down when we were talking about God. He just like struck lightning down.
I can hear you. Yep.
But I
You
want
sound
to
great.
believe like loved the horrors, and I really want to believe that he had all the human experiences. He loved Mary
He's like,
Magdalene.
no.
He had kids. I'm like, I don't know. I feel like yeah, I feel like to take on all the punishment of
Yeah.
humans, that you would at least have to
And he
experience
loved John.
human experience.
Yeah.
I don't know, but
Jesus. One of my favorite songs is about Jesus is called the Rebel Jesus. And I think that Jesus, and I also love this. I can't remember who the lady who wrote Existential Kink. Have you ever read Existential Kink? Oh, it's fascinating. But the lady who wrote that, she calls Jesus a
I
queer
am
witch,
definitely guilty of just making
the queer witch
whatever I
Jesus.
want
And I'm like, hell yeah,
like
that vibes with me.
yeah, and so I was like, why can't I do that?
I mean, look, that's what everyone does. That's why we have white Jesus in America. I would join that. Okay, so we were Jesus. Where were we? Where were we going? We were talking about
The
Jesus.
last thing
You were making a
that
point.
that
You
I
were taking us to a new place.
we might value breastfeeding mothers more because we'll keep everyone fed and we'll be using our milk to cure everything. That's my last apocalypse note.
Yes, I will eat breast milk cheese. I have one final thought before we maybe wrap up, and it's sort of going back to this. I really loved your point about, in fact, I kind of want to use it. I'm probably going to use it in comedy, but I like this idea that the people who are not wearing masks are also the people who aren't wearing condoms. And and I think that if I were to sort of tease under what's underneath that, it reminds me
Just go
of
to Burning Man
one
and
of the
don't
10
mention it
principles
every
of
time you
Burning
talk.
Man, which I have to talk about Burning Man on every episode because that's my favorite thing ever. Right. I haven't actually gone to Burning Man if I don't bring it up every chance that I possibly can. But one of the values is radical self-reliance, right? This idea that as an individual, it's my responsibility to take care of me and to be reliant on myself for the things that I need. And sort of an extension of that
No, I just
culture at Burning
immediately
Man
thought of
is
when
this idea
Gwyneth
of
Paltrow's Goop,
moop.
but you might have missed.
Moop is, have you ever heard of moop? Oh, I know a little bit about Goop. Moop is cooler. Moop is an acronym and it stands for matter out of place. So matter out of place is part of there's a one value which is leave no trace, and the idea is what leave no trace is you should not be able to tell that you were there. And so moop is like garbage, right? So like a card, I have this sticker. This sticker has this backing on it. So if I just peel this sticker off and this backing falls on the ground, that's moop. And I like to think of moop not just in terms of like
Right.
the physical like garbage that I'm leaving around, but the actual like germs are my moop, right? An STD is my moop. If I have an infection, that's my moop. And it's actually my responsibility to handle that. And so when the mask thing was happening and everyone was freaking out, to me, it was really easy because, and everyone was like, they're changing their requirements. Sometimes it's met, sometimes blah, 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 blah. And I'm just like, look, y'all, it is not that hard
Well, I mean,
to take responsibility
I was gonna
for the
the thing
germs that
right
you might
here
be
is
putting
that
out, especially during a global pandemic.
changes
And so
during these times. So while we've
go
reached
ahead.
this amazing place where like HIV is no longer a life sentence and chlamydia is just an antibiotic and you're done and you never have to think about it again. As we lose supplies and resources, we have to start seeing these diseases as more serious. And that's exactly what happened with COVID. It's like, okay, COVID might just be a cough for some. Okay. But when we start losing cough medicine and then we start filling our pockets and we can't treat other people and it becomes like a domino effect of chaos, we're going to be right back into an
Mhm.
HIV epidemic. We're going to be right back into like the bubonic plague of STDs and they become things that kill us again. You-
Yeah. And to me, it's such a simple solution because everyone was like, you can't tell me what to do. You can't tell me to wear. And it seems like that's a similar energy to like masks versus condoms. Like, you can't tell me to wear a mask. You can't tell me to wear a condom. And I think that view is fundamentally fucked because the appropriate view, I think, to be a socially responsible human is, it is socially irresponsible of me to knowingly spread germs and disease to other humans. What a dick move. Why would I do that? When something as simple as, especially like I think about this during like just the regular flu season, like let's remove COVID. The regular flu kills a bunch of people. And during COVID, when everyone was wearing masks, the flu plummeted. And I was like, we should be so now, even though in Utah, masks were never really that much of a thing. But even now today, and I'm vaccinated, I've got everything. If I'm not feeling well, I'll put a mask on because I don't want to intentionally spread something. Why would I ruin someone's day by going out in public and coughing all over them when a simple like piece of fabric is going to help keep everyone around me safe? And it's the same thing with sexual health. Just a little bit of prevention, just a little bit of intentional care, testing, wearing condoms, and you save all of your partners, anyone that you might have contact with, a lot of hurt and a lot of damage.
Forever. We cannot all stay 6 feet apart. So we had these things created to be able to do them safely. Safe sex, safe world, right? And people just absolutely expected it. And it's like, well, so in an apocalypse, do we teach abstinence or do we teach safer sex? And like, what if we lose access to condoms? What if we lose access to STD treatment? Like, how do we continue having safe sex? So these conversations are going to come up because people are not going to stop having sex in an apocalypse. We saw that. We had a 2020 COVID baby boom. Yeah, they'll have a lot of time to do that. So,
if there's one thing we can guarantee that people will do during an apocalypse, it's fuck. To the end, first off, I just want to say, Amber, oh my God, thank you so much for coming on. I loved this conversation. This was exactly what I don't think I knew exactly that we were going to get into all of the areas that we got to, but I feel like this was exactly what I wanted to pull out of you. So thanks for coming on to the podcast and letting me yeah, I think so too. I think it was great to kind of kick people off. So there are two things that I want to do to wrap us up. So number one is I've introduced a new segment on the podcast, which is called Ask a Seer. So as True Prophet,
a little bit. I watched
Ask a Seer Stone. Ask a
and the
Seer
other
Stone.
famous polygamous.
So are you familiar with seer stones in Mormonism?
I'm sure you know. Jessup. He's a Jessup, right?
Oh, Moroni. Is that Moroni?
But I still I don't get it. I didn't grow up
Jessup.
with seer
Yeah. And he's got like a punk rock polygamist. Yeah, he's rad. So Joseph Smith, when he started Mormonism, Joseph Smith was steeped into like this magical worldview, this like occult practice in he was a witch. He was a straight up, him and his family were straight up witches living in rural New York. And before he started a religion, they had what was called a peep stone, and peep stones were pretty common. And basically what you would do is you would put them in a hat and you'd look at them and they would help you find lost things. So what Joseph Smith, like a magic ball. Exactly that. And what Joseph Smith would do is he would hire himself out to rich people who wanted to go dig for buried treasure. And then he would just use that to help them, tell them where to dig and stuff. And then that's how he translated the Book of Mormon. So he's claimed he found this Book of Mormon. He found these gold plates. And then he would just put the rock in his hat, look into the hat, and then the words of the Book of Mormon would appear on the rock. And that's how and then he would dictate them. That's where the Book of Mormon came from. And a lot of his early revelations were received through a seer stone. So he would get revelation. People would ask him questions and he would look at the hat and then he would divine the will of God. And 100%. Yeah. In fact, there's a whole line of thought that is, they're doing scholarly research that is making basically building evidence for a case
Anytime I'm on
that
deathbed,
Joseph
I
Smith
think,
probably
yeah.
used psychedelics in a lot of, and a lot of them did, right? A lot of early cult leaders use psychedelics. Oh my God, 100%. Yeah, like this is true. When I, Joseph Smith there are stories in early Mormon history of Joseph Smith and other people like casting demons out of people.
We
And
all
before I'd done
yeah,
psychedelics, I
we
was
all
like,
have
that's
our
some
own
bullshit.
Smith.
And then I did
Just like
psychedelics and I was like,
for me, like
I
doing
could cast a
acid
demon out of
is going
someone.
back to who
100% I could.
touched you, which is
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of that. Now, Joseph Smith kind of went off the rails. He was not good because fundamentally he didn't realize that it's all a joke and it's all made up. And to me, this is a little bit of a joke, but it's also kind of fun.
pretty.
So I have a seer stone here for you. This is it. I like I like this one. I like this one because it's sort of like kind of that agender idea, right? There's sort of like masculine, feminine. It's kind of like a mix. We don't know exactly what it is. And if you would like to play the game, you don't have to play this game, but if you'd like to play the game, you can ask God a question.
Okay, I've asked God a lot
I
of questions.
will
I've
look at
never
this
gotten
seer stone and I will
I
channel
get
the
I get
answer to your question. It can be about whatever you want,
better. Yeah, you might play God better.
but probably because you
Um,
haven't had me. Yeah.
what do I want to ask
Well,
God? What do I want to ask God, Benjamin? So interesting. Well, okay, so we were talking about death, and I got very much into magic after my grandparents died because I was looking for anything that would connect me with them still. So I was asking the cards all kinds of things and tarot, And after my okay, so I had two
mhm.
experiences. I had talked to a psychic who gave me a message from one of my grandmas.
Yeah.
Mind blowing. I'm like, okay, that I feel good about. The other one, who was very into psychics and said that she would like haunt me after her death and tell me everything, she has stayed closed. And the tarot card, we have a long line of mother daughter wounds. And so my mom doesn't talk to her mom. I don't talk to my mom. And that goes, back and back and back. And every time I pull cards from my grandma, I get the justice card, which is some sort of injustice, some sort of missing answer,
Mm.
or who's right is what I think it is. But maybe it's like it's something I'm missing. And I can't figure out what my grandma is trying to tell me from the other side in regards to these mother daughter. So I would ask God what the fuck I'm supposed to do with that. How am I supposed to feel about this? What is the answer? What is my grandmother telling me? So channel your psychicness and tell me.
Okay. So the question is, what the fuck is Amber's grandma trying to tell her about the mother-daughter wound that has been in this family for generations? So I just have to consult it real quick. Give me just a second. Okay, so verily, verily, thus saith the Lord unto my servant Amber, I'm sorry that the wound went so far and that you're the first person in your line to begin to heal it. And I have to tell you that it will not be fully healed in your life. This is going to take a number of generations to fully integrate and to fully heal. And the place that you want to look isn't back, it's forward. So you need to spend less time trying to get an answer from a grandmother,
Well, it's very interesting that
and you need to spend more
find
time
out the gender of
living that
my
answer
daughter.
that you
And
want into
I had
your
all boys.
future.
Spoiler alert. And when I was pregnant with my last, I consulted a psychic and they said, if you have a girl, you're meant to heal the wound, that you're capable of, you know, healing it through you. If you have another boy, karma basically cut it off and said, we're done letting the women in your line try. And you're going to start over and we will sever the mother daughter chip. Like, and so it's starting me with me. So it won't trickle down through me because I had three. So that's a very interesting answer. I think it aligns. I do have a question for
Yeah,
you.
yeah, boys.
Okay. I have had a podcast episode brewing that I need to bring someone on, and
Rad. I love this.
it's heavily religious in background. And so I want you to
Okay.
come back on the pod and do this one crazy episode with I I'll tell you just a little bit about what happened. I had like
I'm a hell
to
yes.
talk about
Crazy religious. You had me at crazy
sexual abuse
religious.
that happened in her family that has hit national news. Her dad was like a runaway for he had like 12 child victims and he ran away. And she's on her TikTok talking all about her family and religion. And so I thought she was coming on to talk about how religion has kept this quiet in her family. And she ended up hanging up on me like 15 minutes into yeah. And so what I want is to
Oh, I remember
process
you talking. I remember seeing some of your posts
and
about
sort
this.
of
Yeah.
dive into what I think is going on in their situation because of how I see that happening all the time. So I would like to bring you on and just talk about religion's influence on rape culture. I think we
Yeah.
I think that you're someone that can engage on that with me.
Yes. I would love to have that conversation because number 1, huge rape culture in religion. And number 2, one of the things that I sort of experienced on my journey as a man, right, as a man in religion
Right.
is and then deconstructing is realizing how hard religion tried to turn me into a rapist. Right, into someone who disregarded and was unaware, like, I'm so grateful, number 1, that it didn't, that I was able to exit before something like that happened, and I'm also so painfully aware and so angry for all of the little boys who would never do that, who would never there's no part of them that would naturally do that, but they are being groomed and programmed to become those kinds of people. That
Yeah,
that makes me
the
angry
part
for
that she
every little
told
boy in
was
every
when I
religion who's
mentioned
being
that
groomed that way.
Mary
So I would
suffered
love
between
to have
12
that
and 14
conversation.
when she had Jesus. So she wasn't she wasn't a mother, she was a raped child. And she was like, "Well, that's not true." And then I hear her Google and like, "Oh shit, this is
Yeah.
now undoing every single belief I've ever had about anything." Because across the board, it's not a different kind. A 12-year-old is a 12-year-old and some versions of the Bible or some versions of sermons say that she was impregnated before her first cycle or on her first cycle. Uh, so she was a child, and no 12-year-old should ever have to go through birth. In that, basically, the entire story of Jesus is a covered up rape
Yeah.
by the Joseph. Yeah, Joseph 40. Was he 50? Was he 90? I don't. Different
Yeah.
versions.
A god rape. Yeah. Yeah. And not only that, right? Like whether or not, uh, uh, however old she was, she had the fundamental thing is that I think the issue, what happens in rape culture is that we view women as vessels and as
Yeah, and that
lacking autonomy.
sexual
They are
assault
vessels
she
for the
had
male sexual
carried the weight
experience.
of
And that's
shame
exactly what happens to Mary.
that all of this had to happen for salvation, and she had to lose her son when he's only 30. Like, her entire story is so devastating. I've loved every part of learning about Mary in this way. I read a lot of
Yeah.
pieces of it, and now the world has just continued on to celebrate her rape as like the birth of our
Mhm.
Messiah. Like, how, like, can you imagine your childhood rape being turned into like a holiday? I just think about the heaviness of that and how that triggers every part of how we see these situations, how
Oh,
we
that's
see
so wild.
being raped. Like,
Yeah, that sounds rad.
no, it turns men into rapists because who knows? You might rape her and give her the son who saves the world. Yeah, right. The idea that you're supposed to take your trauma and
Right,
make
you might rape the
a
Messiah
solution.
into
And that was
existence. Oh,
like the OG
God.
person who was told
Yeah,
that was Mary.
yeah.
Yeah,
Ooh,
that's
I love that.
all
That's such a
here.
that's such a cool twist to the story. And yeah, I'm down. Let's set it up. Coming up soon, the rape of Mary and how it fucked with the whole culture in the West. Let's do it. Okay, last thing for you then is where can people find you if they want to learn, if they want to get more into your world?
My podcast, Sex Without Fear, and my other podcast, Everything's Canceled, can be found on Spotify, Apple Pod, anywhere where you can find podcasts. And I'm a little bit everywhere. I've got blogs, I've got whatever. So I should be easy to find, and I usually answer messages. I definitely prioritize messages for people looking for resources on trauma or information about sexual topics. And I'm working on a book. And so I'm excited to, I've been talking to a couple editors and self-published authors who are helping me on that journey, and they're friendly.
Yay.
And so I'm like, my platform on my other podcast has just blown the fuck up now. And I always said I would build a platform before I wrote the book to put it out there. And I will be writing a book on how the satanic panic of the 90s contributed to me being raped in my own home. So yeah, that's the goal. I've been weighing, is this going to be two different books, like a memoir? And
Oh my God, that sounds
book? And
fascinating.
I've been encouraged to combine the genres and write them as one. So I might be seeking some of your input on it. I'm a little nervous. So
Totally. Oh my God, that's going to be so brilliant. Oh my God, I would love to be involved and helpful in that creative process. Like if you need beta readers or however that sounds, because the premise of that sounds so fascinating, and I love telling people what I think. So yeah,
I'm not spiritual. I like to do them very practical and logical. Find me, because that's what I have fun doing.
Love that. Okay, awesome. Well, Amber, thank you so much for coming on. Again, everybody, if you are local, if you're in Salt Lake, come see me next weekend, May 3rd and 4th at Wise Guys. And Amber, love you. Thank you so much. You're great. I'm excited to come on and chat more on your podcast. And everybody out there, I do. Yeah, I'm working on that. So I'm slowly like building the infrastructure that I need in order to get out there and do that. Because yeah, I want to get out there and do a show and hang out. So, okay, that's it, y'all. Thanks everybody. Stay safe, keep vibing, and we'll talk to you next week.